Hello, everyone. This is Dory Clark, and we're here with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. Our guest this week is Professor Ludmila Praslova. She's an expert on neurodiversity in the workplace, and we are talking about ways that we can improve the work environment for everyone. Ludmila, it's wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much, Dory. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thanks for joining. And so, okay, my first question is a really basic one. When we're talking about neurodiversity at work, the thing that probably occurs to most people is that we're talking about autism, but actually you mean that, but something broader as well. Can you talk about what neurodiversity really means as you conceptualize it?
Well, in the largest way, neurodiversity really is like biodiversity. It encompasses all the different ways in which people think and feel. And it doesn't necessarily have to apply to any kind of specific way of thinking. Now, neurodiversity movement is a little bit different. That is specifically focused on advancing the rights of people that have not been welcomed in variety of spaces due to their specific ways of thinking. So while neurodiversity in general, as was defined by Judith Singer, applies to everyone, neurodiversity movement is a little bit different because that is specifically something focused on helping neurominorities who previously have been excluded or had fewer opportunities than other people. And so that's where we're talking about autism, which is where that started, but then also ADHD, Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then broader definitions of neurodivergence can also include any different kind of thinking, and it could be anxiety, it could be PTSD, it could be pretty much any condition, including, let's say, an acquired neurodivergence. So right now we're talking about, let's say, long COVID. It does have certain cognitive effects. So there are physical effects, but there are also things that, let's say, people with long COVID can benefit that are the same things that we're talking about in traditional neurodiversity inclusion, which typically would have covered autism, ADHD, and the related differences in thinking.
That's really interesting, Ludmila. Thank you very much. So this is interesting. So when we're talking about neurodiversity and some of the challenges at work, what does that look like? If someone is in the minority in terms of neurodiversity issues, what are some of the challenges? For people who may not have considered this specifically. Obviously, if someone has a physical disability, they need to use a wheelchair. It's relatively self-evident what kind of accommodations would be necessary. But when we think about neurodiversity, it often may be a little harder for people who are not facing those challenges to conceptualize. So what do some of the challenges look like, and what are some of the recommendations? Obviously, we'll talk a lot more about this, but broadly speaking, what kinds of things are we talking about?
Oh, it is a lot, as you know. And we can talk about access. So do you even get a job? And then we can talk about success, how you function in the workplace. So let's say getting jobs might be more difficult. Traditionally, a lot of job entry relies on the interview. So if you have communication differences, or if people explain your body language, which could be just due to discomfort with eye contact or just general fidgetiness that has nothing to do with anything, but they kind of attribute it to character flaws due to pop psychology that's completely inaccurate, that can really hurt your chances of getting the job, even though you're perfectly qualified. So that's one situation. But then we're talking about access, and access is not everything. People can get into jobs, but then experience prejudice from coworkers, bullying. We do know that neurominorities are more likely to experience bullying, or training may not be designed for those people. In some organizations, it could be all written. Well, not so wonderful for people with dyslexia, right? In other companies, it could be all videos with no transcripts. you know what, not so wonderful for many autistic people who would much rather just read transcripts. So when we lack flexibility in the workplace, such as flexibility in training methods, in schedules, in how people judge you, do they even allow for any kind of personality differences? All of those things add up to pretty significant disadvantages over the lifetime of one's career.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. This is Dory Clark. We're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. And our guest this week is Professor Ludmila Praslova. She's a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and other publications. And we're talking about neurodiversity at work. Now, one of the things that I think is most interesting, Ludmila, about neurodiversity is that, in some cases, it gets talked about as a sort of disability issue in the sense that there needs to be more thought and accommodations. But also, on the other hand, if we look certainly at some neurodivergent situations like people on the autism spectrum, there are actually things that people on the autism spectrum definitely do better than neuromajority people. And so how do you think about this or talk about it in the sense that a disability frame doesn't actually seem technically quite precise? What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, yes, that is a huge debate. And even within neurodivergent community and even within autism community, there are different perspectives. So there are elements of disability and there are cultural elements. And in general, the disability perspective has been quite problematic, which is why one of the ways we talk about disability, but not really disability, is social disablement. And that comes from the social perspective on pretty much any disability. But when it comes specifically to neurodivergence, let's say my ability to hear things that other people don't is not a disability. It is, however, disability when other people just make noise because it doesn't bother them. So in this particular case, it's social disablement, even though I'm capable of very high performance. But if I'm socially disabled by the raucous, that's not going to happen. And we also kind of have to be really careful. Sometimes people take it a little bit too far and say, oh, yeah, so hire autistic people because they're blah, blah, blah good at data organization, which in some cases is true. Like any stereotype, it's applicable to some people, not to other people. Research does show that there are certain strengths and certain abilities within those groups, but they don't apply to every individual, which is why we need to really look at every specific person. And every specific person has strength and has areas they struggle with. We call it spiky ability profile. So we can be really good at some things, but it doesn't mean we're good at everything. And we struggle with some things, but it doesn't mean we don't have areas of giftedness. So basically, flexibility and individualized approach makes a lot more sense than this just idea that, okay, let's just put everybody into a box, and if you don't fit into a box, you're broken. How about we just create work environments where people can function to their best and just work with everyone in a way that brings out the best. And it could be through job crafting. It could be through positioning people in ways that really allow them to work their best. But yes, disability framework doesn't quite cut it. And I come from cultural diversity perspective. So some of the issues with communication can be also seen as just inability to understand particular language or particular communication style. So that is more of a cultural difference in some ways that people might just learn to look at those differences in a way that they, for example, don't take some things personally because it's actually not about you. So we all have quite a bit of cultural learning to do. And a lot of neurodivergent people already have done a lot of learning, and a lot of neurodivergent people have tried their entire lives to function according to neurotypical expectations and mask, that's the word, kind of try to pretend something that we're not. And it would be really fantastic if the world was actually a little bit more accepting and flexible as well.
That's great. We're here with Professor Ludmila Praslova. We're talking about neurodiversity at work. This is Dory Clark in our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. Now, Ludmila, how did you get into this line of research? Can you talk about your personal experience and why this is a topic of interest to you?
Sure. And obviously, most people get into topics after some kind of personal experience with a particular aspect. So in my case, I've been in the field of diversity since I was 19 years old in some shape or form, but I didn't get into neurodiversity until much later. And well, there was no neurodiversity when I just started my career. There was no that approach, but I kind of started trying to figure out some of the issues around how diversity interventions work in the workplace. And specifically, uh, I was looking at gender interventions and trying to figure out why this kind of thing, okay, let's promote some women within a year, doesn't really work very well. Well, it leads to jousting. It leads to all kinds of things that happen when people say, this is an opportunity and it's going to be over in a year, right? And not everyone functions this way. Autistic people, for example, don't function that way. When you just have to, bring out the elbows and start pushing everybody around. So I was like, this is not working for various reasons. And and then I started looking at autism in women. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, why did it take me so long to realize it? Because typically what we're taught is, 4-year-old boy, interests and traits and all that stereotypical kind of thing. Women present differently, period. Women mask, which is hard work, and it's not necessarily intentional, but women just generally tend to feel more of the pressure to, fit in and be pleasant and do what everybody else is doing. So that has a major component why women are not identified later in life. And then, of course, most people who are older than like mid-millennials basically haven't had an opportunity because there was very little diagnosis in early generations. So many people who are, let's say, Gen Xers literally did not have an opportunity to be identified as children. So then I kind of had a slow light bulb. Oh, well, that explains things. And then I came across this horrendous statistic that in the States, there's 85% unemployment among autistic people with college degrees. That's people with college degrees. So they are obviously capable of things. And so that was just like, okay, this needs to change because this is wrong. This is something that needs to be addressed. And so that was a great stimulus for my passion to get into neurodiversity work.
That's terrific, Ludmila. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, just out of curiosity, I mean, of course, anybody who's interested in this, they need to be, seeing their own medical professionals and things like that. But just for our cultural literacy, because you're right, when you read in the popular imagination or whatever about autism, it's usually young boys, as you said, like, oh, they're sort of obsessed with their thing, whatever their thing is. But it does appear very differently for women. So just so we have a sense, how does autism sort of manifest, for women who, as you said, seem to be better at masking things, so they themselves might not even be fully clued in. What is it that people need to be aware of?
Well, again, it can manifest very differently in every person. There could be very strong interests, but they could be interests like history or literature or art, and it might be a little bit more intense than the average, and sometimes you have trouble not talking about it, but it's not something that people would identify as a completely unusual interest. I mean, somebody likes cats. Okay, lots of women like cats, right? So it's sometimes it's a matter you like cats, right? You have two, and they're wonderful. But it could be a little bit more than that. Like they know every type of coloring and every type of everything about cats, and it's not their job. They just learned all for fun, right? So, or history, or geography, or literature, or particular author, or particular musician, or like literally whatever. And so sometimes it's just intensity. And also, one thing that people don't understand about all autistic people in general, not necessarily females, the huge stereotype is the lack of empathy, which is actually not true. And the research shows that autistic people can be highly empathetic, but sometimes have hard time expressing it. So it's overwhelming to the point that you shut down because you feel so strongly, but you don't express it. So very often, autistic women would say, like, I care so much, I just crash and freeze. So that would be another thing. And that is another thing that sometimes kind of prevents the diagnosis because it's very different from what you would expect. And another thing would be just kind of like you perceived as slightly odd or different, or like you can't tolerate high heels and polyester because it just doesn't make sense and doesn't agree with you, to the point where you actually don't do it, and people say things about you like you don't care about things. You actually do. But again, you have to be careful because there are some people who can obsess over fashion because that's their thing. So you just have to be really, really careful with trying not to stereotype or pigeonhole anyone, because there are many ways in which we could be different, not realize. And then there are things um well, sensory distraction, obviously. Very often we're just told, stop being a princess. I was told, like, stop being a princess all the time. But no, I'm not imagining it. I do hear those things, and I do feel the vibration from the air conditioner. I'm not making those things up. So many people who are neurodivergent will tell you, people just tell them, you're making it up, or you just toughen up, stop, just stop being sensitive. But you literally can't stop being sensitive because it's hardwired.
Right. Super interesting. Thank you. We're here with Ludmila Praslova. We're talking about neurodiversity at work. This is Dory Clark with our Newsweek weekly interview show, Better. Now, one of the things we do every week is we have our interview guest nominate a better leader of the week who they believe has exemplified some positive work in terms of diversity and inclusion. And Ludmila, your nominee is Jeff Hiddenberger. Jeff Hiddenberger is the Dean of the School of Education at Vanguard University. Could you talk a little bit about Jeff and why you nominated him?
I've known Jeff for many years in his various incarnations, when he was in Vanguard and when he was leading Orange County Department of Education, and then his following incarnation at Vanguard. And he is someone who definitely has a lot of passion for helping people, including neurodivergent communities. But specifically for Orange County, he has done a lot in helping preserve a very interesting history about Latina education in Orange County, which is actually, there's some powerful history because there used to be actually segregation. So the movement to desegregate education in California, he really helped to just help people preserve this history. Now he started a podcast where he brings very interesting perspectives on education, and including, let's say, native perspectives on education. So he's always trying to amplify messages that people otherwise would not have heard, and help bringing various communities with cultural diversity and education, but then all the other ways diversity comes into our lives, to the attention of anyone he interacts with.
Oh, that's great. Well, congratulations to Jeff Hittenberger, our Better Leader of the Week. And Ludmila, as we're beginning to come into the close of our interview, I want to conclude with, perhaps the most important question, which is for managers or for, business leaders who really want to make the workplace better for neurodiverse employees. What are some of the top things that people can implement that you feel like would make a real difference and a real impact in terms of both recruiting and retaining talented neurodiverse professionals?
Believe people when they say they need something. Don't make accommodations something that is so difficult to obtain. And just give flexibility to everyone. Not everyone is self-identified. Not everyone has a doctor's note. It's very hard to get diagnosis. So if something can improve somebody's performance, why not just give it to them? So don't make accommodations such a huge deal. Just think about them as ways to help everyone. And also try to educate yourself and just get away from the stereotype, and get to know each individual and how they function, what they need, and what is their best way in which they work and in which they can share their talents. So really flexibility and participation. Let people speak into their own work. And I do have the canary code model if somebody wants to look at more depth. It's an HBR from last summer. So there's a variety of things that people can do, but just start getting to know people and create flexible environments, because flexibility is something that can really go a very long way in creating much better workplaces.
That's a great tip. Thank you so much. We've been here with Professor Ludmila Praslova. You can learn more about Ludmila and connect with her on LinkedIn. Just look her up on LinkedIn, Ludmila Praslova. We've been talking about neurodiversity in today's workplace. And this is Dory Clark with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. You can learn more and sign up to get updates at doryclark.com. Ludmila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been fantastic to talk to you.
Thank you all, and see you next week.